All right. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar for optimizing patient recruitment and retention in influenza studies. We're going to talk about some practical strategies for success. I'm Leanne Volke. I'm an executive vice president at Solia, a division of Entrada Ventures. And I've got some other great panelists here with me today. I'm going to let you know who they are. We've got Amber McAllister, who is an associate director of patient recruitment at Parexel. Welcome, Amber. Georgia Hardy, a senior associate director in patient recruitment at Innovative Trials. Welcome, Georgia. And Antonia Drea, who is a director of strategic accounts at TransPerfect. Welcome, Antonio. So we're going to kick things off as folks are getting into the room with a poll. And I'm going to launch it now. And if you can answer here on the screen, it'll pop up. Do you have any active upcoming flu studies? Now, I took a look this morning at clinicaltrials.gov, and there are currently 141 recruiting studies. So we'll see if you're in the room with us today. And there's 45 not yet recruiting studies. What that means is there's a lot of competition for these patients. So today we're going to talk about some strategies and tips and techniques that can help you. So we have about 50% yes, who do have some active upcoming, and oops, now it's adjusting. 66% have none coming up, and 33% do. So perfect. All right. Let's kick things off with some questions for our panelists here. What factors do you think we really need to think about for patient recruitment for flu? What's the most important thing? Amber, let's have you start.
Yeah, why not? No, so I think there's a couple of different levels I think to think about this at. So if you're at the sponsor level, I would say you need to think about deburdening your sites. There are going to be potentially floods of patients coming in waves, right? Like that's how we see it in our communities. We see it in our schools and everything. All of a sudden, everybody's got the flu and hopefully they're coming in, right? So if you're thinking about this from, if you're the sponsor, if you're the CRO, if you're helping to kind of think about these strategies and everything, the number one thing I would say is think about ways to deburden your site. Make things easy to access. Make it to where if there's a question about what to do with their patient next or how to answer a potential patient's question, make that information incredibly easy to get at. Put it on a portal where everything is there. Make sure that the training is fast. It's to the point so that the site can find that information when they need it and they're not searching through that really thick protocol to try to find it. And if you're a site, then I would say think about a way to deburden your patient. Remember how it felt the last time that you had the flu and you just felt super crummy and you just wanted to feel better. And those are the people that are coming in to see you. They just want to feel better. Make sure that that information is incredibly accessible for them. Quick handouts, that ICF, we all know. We all know that ICF is super important, but it's also really lengthy. Make sure that the information is easy for them to digest. They feel awful. They are not coming to you because they're feeling good, right? Like they're coming to you because they're feeling pretty bad and they want to feel better. So how can you make this the easiest thing for them to do? You're needing to overcome them feeling bad. And that's why they're in your office. They want to feel better. But also you need to overcome this idea that maybe they thought they were going to come in. And if you're in the US, they're just going to get some Tamiflu and they were going to head back home. You need to kind of overcome what their expectation is versus maybe what you're offering them with regards to a clinical trial. So if you're the sponsor, if you're setting these strategies, deburden your sites is my number one thing. How can you make this easier for them to do? And if you're a site, deburden your patients. How can you make this the easiest option? And just remember, you felt really crummy last time that you had the flu. So like, how can you make this a little bit of a, not better experience, but a more compassionate experience for them.
Exactly. You bring up a couple good points. We know from data that 91% of sites don't have adequate staff for patient recruitment. So really looking at how can you make it easy for sites and how can you make it easy for patients? It might even be handing them a box of Kleenex when they come in and their nose is right, and maybe you put maybe you put a sticker on there. Ask us about our clinical trials. Like, where are they going to be looking? And our audience who are online, you can also submit questions in the Ask a Question box. So make sure you load that up for us too, and we'll get to your questions. Georgia, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, so kind of just highlighting on the point about protocol design. So obviously we don't want to burden the sites, but equally we don't want to burden the patient. So some of the most successful influenza studies I've seen are when there's home health options. So as you mentioned, patients feel incredibly poorly when they're suffering from the flu. Some of them, physically might not have the energy to get up and go to the sites. So where possible, offer those kind of remote phone screening calls, or actually have a nurse go in to kind of conduct the screening at the comfort of their own home. So I think protocol design is key and can definitely kind of set you apart from competitors when it comes to this saturated kind of clinical trial market. So I'd definitely kind of highlight that piece.
Absolutely.
And I'd say Leanne, I'd say from a patient perspective as well. Obviously, if you've got those home health visits, that's brilliant, but also kind of keeping them up to date with that trial as they progress. Obviously, again, if they're not feeling very well, consider offering navigator support, where a navigator can actually contact the patient, let them know about that upcoming visit, or inform them the next stages within that particular clinical trial. So I think that's also kind of fundamental to the success of some of these studies.
Mm-hmm. Right. Going to where the patients are, how can we make it easier for them? And then even thinking about, where are the patients? We once had people, a site was very creative, and they took an ad and they put it in the pharmacy cold and flu section, saying, if you're interested in a clinical trial, here's the number, call this number. So how can we really think outside the box? And, one of the mandates that we've been asked to think outside the box is with the FDA Omnibus Reform Act, and thinking about, how are we getting more diverse patients? How are we being more inclusive? Antonio, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. And I absolutely agree with what Amber and Georgia just added to the conversation. Thinking about this key factor, I would say localization is definitely something to take into consideration. Amber, you said that it's important for the patient to have all the necessary information, and localization plays a key part in making sure that the patient have all the necessary information in their native language. I know, Georgia, you also mentioned the patient navigator supporting the patient and making sure that they have the necessary line of support. Localization also plays a big part in making sure that the patients are engaged in the study.
Antonio, can you just clarify what you mean by localization, in case some folks aren't clear on that?
Yeah, absolutely. As much as important is creating the content in an easy way to understand, so health literacy is definitely very important. Making sure that the content is localized, translated in different languages, and basically the patient, whatever the background is, whatever which group, minority group they are part of, they have the materials, the patient-facing materials available in their own language. So for them to make an educated decision regarding the study.
Right. And even, thinking of ads and where can they be? Sometimes people think about translation just into Spanish, but Spanish is different in Spain than Los Angeles. It's even different in Miami than Los Angeles. So depending on where you're looking at getting patients and sites, we always think of Spanish, but then there's also other populations to consider. Amber, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, and really thinking about, what are the populations available to the sites in your study if you're running that, right? Like, it's not just, we've got US, so we'll do English and Spanish. Really speaking with your sites and understanding early on, like, what languages would be helpful. I was on a study before that we were in Canada, and we needed Punjabi and Hindi. It was who that site had access to. Of course, they had ICFs in those languages, and all of that is super important. They were able to really administer the study in those languages. But don't just check off the box and be like, US, that's going to be English and Spanish. But really getting that information from your site early on, so that you understand who do they have access to. So you're not just getting those English speaking or Spanish speaking patients. If they have access to a Punjabi population in Canada, make sure you have access to that Punjabi, population in Canada.
Right. And again, that's really caring for the patient. If a patient doesn't feel good, if I don't feel good and you give me something complicated that's a wall of text to read, I'm not going to read it because, if my head's hurting and my nose is running, it's just not going to happen. I'll say, forget it. Give me the Tamiflu. I'll go home.
Exactly.
What's the number one thing to keep in mind when recruiting? We've got this unpredictable flu season. How can we really predict where to focus the efforts?
I think it's really important to consider kind of the flu cases. So obviously you'll have your selected sites, but we know kind of in the Northern Hemisphere, the flu season's different to the Southern Hemisphere, but also kind of within that hemisphere and within countries and certain cities, there are certain cases and spikes within flu. So it's really important that you conduct and review the weekly flu surveillance data. And with that, you can optimize and ramp up your recruitment campaigns. So for example, if I know that the cases are going to be high in London next week, I might then increase a digital campaign to go alongside that, because the likelihood is that there's going to be lots of people that are either about to contract flu or have flu, and they may be scrolling on their phone. So it seems like a great initiative to kind of increase that campaign. Alongside that, I might also consider doing community outreach in those locations. So if it's a flu treatment option, we know that those kind of recruitment windows are so short. So really focusing your recruitment efforts when those hotspots are about to occur. So looking for those trends, looking for those rise in cases, and kind of increasing your recruitment initiatives. And then you've got to think about, where are these community hotspots? So got Freshers Week coming up at universities, schools. We all know that, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, flu cases do spike around this time of year. So making sure that if you are going to conduct community outreach, you're doing it at the right time. And I would say, again, some of the kind of COVID studies that I oversaw in the UK, when we kind of increased those campaigns and increased those initiatives, September, October, it was brilliant to kind of target universities and schools at that time of year. So really thinking about where the cases, reviewing the data, determining kind of where those cases are high, and then thinking about what is the appropriate strategy in that particular location.
Right. Even, look at places where there's high density of people, long-term care facilities where you maybe have healthy seniors that are living there. All together, someone gets the flu and you're going to have multiple cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
I completely agree with everything else. We've done a campaign in the villages before in Florida for exactly what you're mentioning, Leanne. And I would say I love the data-driven approach of being able to be like, here's where the hotspots are. We can see it coming. Let's get those ads ahead of there. And what I would say is to prepare for that, because I'm a mom, right? So like, I want to be ready for the worst case scenario. When we're planning for our study and we're strategizing, how are we going to help find these patients? Prepare for that kind of outreach, like right now. Like, go ahead and be like, at the start of the study, what materials will I need to actually launch that digital outreach campaign, or to have that brochure to hand out to the patients, or to actually get ahead of it? What information, what content do I need? And go ahead and develop that before all of those hit, so that it's just ready to launch. So anytime I'm working with sponsors or sites, they're like, "Ooh, I don't really like using, I don't use the poster that often," or whatever. That's totally fine. Let's just make sure that we have a plan and we develop that content to support that plan early, so that it's all submitted, it's all approved, it's got all the green lights on it, it's in the right languages. And then as I need to, I'm just doling that stuff out. I don't need to worry about developing content, getting it translated, getting it submitted and approved when I'm in the middle of a surge that I wish I could use that content for.
Right. Proactive planning. I think that's key. What do you need? Who are you going to be targeting? Which languages do you need it in? How can you support sites? So all of these things can contribute to a successful study. How do you really make a study stand out against a different study? We know right now there's 145 getting ready to recruiting and 45 not yet recruiting. So 186 studies. How do you make, if you're a sponsor, how do you make yours the one that people want to enter?
I think this is a really good question. And I think it's a really complicated question. What I think immediately comes to mind for me is that, again, if I'm thinking as the patient and putting this together as a patient-centric strategy, if I get the flu, I just want to feel better. If I'm going to drive 5 minutes to get urgent care treatment, or I'm going to have to drive 45 minutes to my primary, I just want to feel better right now. I don't want to spend an hour and a half in the car. So I want to make sure that as a study site, I'm anticipating, okay, I want this to be a patient-centric experience. I want this to be easy. I want them to know ahead of time, if you get the flu, you can come here. And like, this is what your experience is going to be like. We're going to make this as easy and as unburdensome as possible for you. So I think that it's really hard, right, to stand out, because everybody just wants to feel better, and they're like, whatever, just give me some medicine and make me feel better at this point. So I would say make sure that you get your message out there early and often, so that people know, hey, there is a flu treatment study going on at this place. Here's how far away it is from me. They're going to make it fast and easy, hopefully, whenever I get there, making sure that that message is coming through, because like I said, they just want to feel better. These patients just want to feel better. And it feels like this is the easiest, the fastest, the best way to feel better. I think that's going to be the best way you have of getting patients to choose to come to your location instead of maybe the urgent care across the street or their primary that they've had a relationship with before.
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point there. And actually, patients are more likely to enroll in clinical trials if they've heard it from their from a healthcare provider. So making sure that they're prepared, they're ready in case cases do increase, and they have the right tools that they can give to the patient. So, for example, I might have seen my doctor several months ago, but if they'd kind of shared a brochure or a flyer with me about a particular trial, at least then that resonates with me, so that in a few months' time, if I was to suffer with the flu, I can refer back to that piece of information. So it's all about trust. Obviously, you want the recruitment materials to stand out from all the other kind of competing studies, but equally, you want to know they're from a trusted source. If I just found a leaflet on the floor, am I likely to participate on a flu study? Maybe not. However, if I went to a pharmacy and my pharmacist said, "Oh yes, there is a particular flu trial being run," or if I went to the doctor, so it's that element of trust, but also ensuring that the materials are really easy to read and easy to refer back to. Because again, I might have had that discussion several months ago when I didn't have the flu, and now I'm suffering in 2 months 2 months later. So I need to ensure that information is really digestible, easy to understand, and easy to refer back to. And Leanne, as you said at the beginning, kind of some people do like all the information in the world, but equally, if you're not feeling very well, you probably don't want to sit there and read a really long brochure. But if there's just that information at your fingertips that's really easy to digest, I think you're more likely to enroll on a flu trial.
Right. Think about it. If someone has the flu and you're telling them, "Oh, you're going to be in a study. Great. I'll be with you in 45 minutes." They're leaving. They're going to take a nap at home.
Yeah.
So really looking at where can we remove the friction points. There's a site in Nashville that has a 97% retention rate for studies.
How?
And they get patients coming back again and again and again. And I asked them, like, what's your secret? And it comes down to the simple things, these simple things about connecting with people at an empathetic level, in a language they understand, in a manner they understand, giving them the right amount of information. It could even be, okay, are you kind of a person that likes to know every detail, or do you want the high level? You can pick up based on how they're speaking. Are they speaking really quickly, or are they speaking very slowly and methodically, looking at each graphic? And tailoring your approach to match them.
I completely agree, Leanne. Patient engagement, I think, is one of the main factor, as well as Georgia, you also mentioned that briefly, but also if the patient will go to a clinical site and, they meet someone with a medical background that can relate to, they can build the trust with, I think that's definitely something very important to take into consideration. And something else that I would add probably is making sure that the participant understand why they're doing what they're doing and feel part of the bigger picture as well.
One thing I want to add is, I've had this happen and I've heard about it from other patients. I screen for trials periodically because I think I'm in the industry, so I should participate. And I was told I didn't qualify for the trial, which I guess was a good thing, but I was kind of annoyed, to be quite honest. And I didn't know why, but it was no even like, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this screening that took you 10 minutes. You didn't qualify, but if you know someone else who has the flu, I don't have the flu, I'm good, I'm safe right now. If you know someone else who's experiencing flu-like symptoms, let them know that we're doing a trial. A simple referral is a great option to really try to reach more people, and acknowledging people who do screen and maybe don't qualify.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, especially when we look at something like the flu. Typically, the likelihood is if they live with members, if they live in the same house with different members of their family or friends, they are potentially likely to contract the flu too. So definitely kind of looking at those patient referrals where possible, whether or not they do pass the screening, I think is really important. Because one of the trials I was kind of overseeing, one of the main recruitment barriers was because the patient did actually have the correct flu, the flu that the trial was obviously assessing and looking for treatment for. But the challenge was that they didn't come to the site in time. So they reported their symptoms. They did the level of the initial phone screening, but the time they got to the site, they didn't have those symptoms. So they were no longer eligible. But however, if they were caught kind of 24 hours prior to that, they may have been. So lots of that relied on kind of ensuring that the sites contacted those patients within that short window, or relying on patient referrals when that particular patient wasn't eligible.
Great point. We often hear that a site gets a referral and it could be 2-3 days before they call them back. With flu, you don't have that luxury. And in most things, you don't have that luxury, because if you call a patient back 3 days later, they've gone on to the next thing and they're usually not interested. So really thinking about how can we alleviate, back to what you were saying, Amber, how can we alleviate the burden on the site to make sure that that patient is getting the quick response that they come to know and love, right? If I can call and lunch can be at my door in 40 minutes, or if I can get online and order something and it's at my door by 5 o'clock tonight, patients are primed to expect that same level of immediacy. So what can we do to kind of meet them at their expectation?
I love supporting call centers, or like the patient navigator service that you guys have, Georgia, because it really does speed up that process in doing digital outreach campaigns. Think about placing ads online, social media, which could be a real boon. In a flu study, we always are told, we always hear there's a 48-hour shelf life for these referrals, right? It's even smaller on a flu study, right? Because you've got that protocol mandated period of time of when their symptoms started and when they actually enroll. And so it is really important. I think there are options of having call centers or additional screening support available through a lot of digital outreach campaigns. Take advantage of those for sure. When it comes to these flu studies, it deburdens the sites. It makes sure that the patients get that really quick turnaround. They completed a survey. A few hours later, they're already getting a phone call. That's that Amazon Prime service, right? Like that's that quick turnaround of what you're looking for. And they haven't forgotten that's what they were completing that survey about. And so having, a call center or somebody there to step in and help take some of that burden off the site, and maybe do some pre-screening, like, oh, actually, it doesn't sound like you're going to qualify. You don't have a fever. I'm sorry that you feel poorly. Let us know if symptoms progress. Take some of those patients off. And then the other thing I would say, sponsors, you didn't hear me say this. Go ahead and close your ears. I'm going to go ahead and give the sites a little bit of permission to. It is okay to press pause on a campaign like that and say, ooh, I've got too many patients to go through right now, and I just need a moment to catch up. Because we do want those patients to be retained. We want them to actually still be eligible by the time you're able to process them and get them in your door and make sure they really have the flu and they get all of those protocol things are taken care of, right? We want you to have time to be able to build a little rapport, make sure that the patient is having a good experience so they are retainable, and maybe reduce some of that screen failure rate, because we're bringing in too many patients that really could have been pre-screened out on the phone. So I personally would rather you have a really successful campaign with a lower screen fail rate and a high retention rate than see you get absolutely flooded for months with referrals that you just can't keep up with. So my 2 cents, for whatever it's worth to any sites that are listening, is it's okay to be like, oh, can I just have a 2-week pause on referrals for this campaign? Can we just not do outreach for a second? Let me catch back up. And then we can turn it back on once I feel like I'm back on top of it, because otherwise these patients are not going to get this Amazon Prime type service. They're not going to get what they need to make sure they are engaged and they are retainable.
We want patients to be raving fans of clinical trials.
Yes.
Because if they don't qualify for this trial, maybe they'll do the next one or the next one. And when we forget about the humanness behind, the other end of a screen or a phone or, a mask or a Kleenex, we disconnect. And at our core, we're craving connection as beings, and to really try to connect with people in a way that is kind and compassionate and caring, the way that we would want to be, or the way that we'd want our parent or child or someone connected to. We have another poll, because we've been talking a lot about flu studies, but we've got some vaccine studies going on too when I was perusing clinicaltrials.gov. So the poll is, which are more difficult to recruit? Flu studies, flu treatment, or vaccine studies? So let's shift gears just a little bit. I know we've been talking a lot about flu treatment studies. For vaccine studies, what's most important to remember? Don't all jump at once.
I think taking into consideration the tight deadlines as well and the short recruitment window as well. So making sure, again, the patient are engaged, and then you have all the necessary resources to successfully build the recruitment strategy. I think it's definitely something to take into consideration as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say kind of the patient education piece is key. Obviously, that there are many kind of flu vaccines available that have already been clinically tested. So making them aware kind of why this one is kind of being tested, explaining about clinical trials in general, explaining how the research can kind of benefit future treatments. So really giving them that risk benefit analysis, really breaking down kind of why it's being researched, I think is so important. So I think for these, typically you might spend more time with the patient just so they understand a little bit more kind of why they should have this particular vaccine over maybe something that's already approved, or why they should have a vaccine at all, because some patients might feel have an anti-vax mindset. So I think the patient education piece is so fundamentally important. And then again, similarly, we talk about the patient recruitment materials, but again, having different ways to educate the patients, whether that's a healthcare professional sitting with the patient to explain it, or whether there's those different recruitment materials, depending on how that patient likes to learn and read and absorb that information.
Yeah, Georgia, I completely agree. And I really like the point about that patient education piece, because I think that flu vaccine studies every study has their unique challenges. But when it comes to flu vaccine studies, I think that the challenge is that there are so many other options, and there are options that you don't really have to think about, because I could go to my CVS and they'll give me a flu vaccine and I don't even know. I don't even know who made it. I don't know much about it other than they said, hey, here's our flu vaccine. Are you ready? I'm like, sure, sounds great. So I think when it comes to flu vaccines, there's a whole other patient mindset that you kind of have to address of, I could just go get a flu vaccine. Why is this one different? Why should I consider something that maybe feels like more work or just feels different? And that like psychology of a patient of I just wanted a flu vaccine. Like why should I do something that feels like it's different or extra work or something like that? And so that's really the challenge, and why that patient education piece is so important, why it's so important for it to be digestible, understandable in their language, is because we are trying to get at not just why should you be in this trial, but like why should I consider one at all? And of all of the horrible, awful, no good, very bad things that COVID did across the world, one thing that it did do, I think, is maybe open up the conversation about vaccines and clinical trials and make that a little bit more norm. That's going to go away. Like we're going to lose that, but we need people to remain open to those conversations. And so having materials that are not just about your study, but about like, why should I consider a clinical trial at all? This feels weird. Should I feel weird about this? Like, this feels scary. And being able to address those in a really open way and make it feel like the patient isn't doing something weird. They're not necessarily doing something scary. I'm actually giving you more information because, like I said, if I just go to my local pharmacy, they're going to be like, hey, here's your vaccine. And I'm not going to get that much information about it. So I think it's a different type of psychology to overcome with the patient education piece in a vaccine trial for flu than it would be for flu treatment. Because I just want to feel better when I have the flu. For the vaccine, it's a little bit more, this is proactive. This is forethought.
Agreed. And I'm not sure, I would say in the UK as well, not everyone has the flu vaccine. I think lots of people have that mindset, I never get the flu, I've never had the flu.
Yes.
Not only do you have to explain about a potential study, you're also trying to explain about the potential benefit of having a vaccine in general to prevent you from getting the flu. Whereas when someone feels poorly, you're kind of looking at any option to feel better. So it definitely is a different psychology. You've hit the nail on the head there.
And that's where there's, you guys were talking about more rapport is needed in that vaccine study. And then also really thinking about, we've got Walgreens entering into the clinical trial space, and the pharmacists there being able to give the vaccines, and Walgreens is entering into more trials. So especially vaccine trials. So the ability for them to go to where they would be getting the regular flu shot and then just enter into a trial. So thinking outside the box. Now, in that vein of thinking outside the box, what has been something that you've tried in a study and been surprised that has worked, or something that didn't work? You thought, this is a great idea, and then not so much.
That's a good question, Leanne. I've got one in mind, but I'm a little worried to put anything on blast. But here we go. So in talking about the pharmacies, I think that's a great option. Thinking about how, Walgreens or, these pharmacies can serve as sites, because that's where a lot of folks are going to get their shot or their jab, right? It's super convenient. They can go right in. And I think that is super exciting. Whenever we first started talking to pharmacies about doing clinical trials and thinking like old school, even like 10 years ago, one of the things that we were like, this would be amazing, is to put flyers and handouts in little bags. At least in the US, you get those little paper bags, it's stapled shut, it's got your medicine in there. You're like, you just got to put a brochure or something in there. And like, people will absolutely read it. They'll love it. And so we talked a lot to pharmacies about doing that and like what is the logistics of getting these materials in there, getting it set up and making sure that happens. And what we found was that nobody looks at the inserts in.
I do.
They rip it open, they pull out the medicine, and they throw the rest in the trash. And that would go for whatever study content we were putting in there. And so instead, what was better would be an active conversation with the pharmacist or the tech, whoever's handing over that medication, to engage with the patient at that point of contact and be like, hey, there's a study, it looks like whatever medication you're picking up, you might be a good patient to qualify, or, like we're doing this vaccine study here. We just wanted you to know, that kind of thing. So we were really excited. We were like, these paper baggies, they're going to be everything. And everybody just rips it open and nobody actually looked in it. But with that being said, those more active patient engagement opportunities where they're like actually talking to the patient, looking them in their eyes and saying, hey, this is a study I think you should consider. That was far more effective than those things in the baggies, which was disappointing, but a good lesson learned for sure.
I still think that one has some merit.
I mean, like, right? It just seems like it should work. It just seems like it should work.
We'll talk offline.
We'll figure it out.
I would say when there was a COVID study that was being run, there was a similar approach, but slightly different. So rather than putting recruitment materials in the pharmaceutical paper bags, they were putting them in takeaway bags because at the time everyone could only do one of two things, which was sleep and get takeaways. So yeah, that was one of the recruitment initiatives, and actually it did surprisingly kind of boost recruitment. So but I appreciate it was a very different time back then, and people probably had the time to sit and read the flyers inside the paper bags. But definitely a recruitment initiative that, as you said, might not always work, but definitely has a place.
I'd say so. No, and maybe it's about choosing your timing and your audience as well, right? Not that we all want to go back to a COVID timing, but yeah, like choosing your audience in particular, not just, hey, we're going to put this in every baggie that goes out, you know?
If they sneeze on the phone, then put the flyer in the baggie.
Yeah.
There we go. You can also do EDDM, which is every door direct mail, and it's fairly cheap. And you just pick a zip code and ship out a flyer to them, and you could say, hey, keep this on your refrigerator. If you or someone in your family gets the flu, you can participate in the study, or even with vaccine trials. Look at maybe if there's zip codes where people maybe don't get a vaccine, you can get that data and then send it to those.
And I would say just to add, and looking back at the time where we supported on many COVID studies as well as a language and technology service provider, I'm I'm very impressed about how we were able to work all together, different pieces as a team, right? And being able to localize different materials in several languages, and being able to turn around that pretty quickly as well, in improving and making sure that the vaccine was an overall success. So that's definitely something that I wanted to add to the conversation as well.
Very much so. One thing that that I've seen, and I've actually gone into my doctor's office here in Middle Tennessee, and they had this big like 2 or 3x4 poster, and it said, get information about are you flu, or do you think you have flu or COVID? Get information about a possible clinical trial. I was like, oh, let me see it. And I looked on the table, and guess what I saw? People Magazine, Sports Illustrated, no flyer whatsoever. and then so when I went into the patient room, the exam room, I was again looking for information, and I found, a cardstock stand-up type thing tucked back on the windowsill, halfway behind the wall, and again, more information about the study. So what I would say is, if you're giving sites information about the study, make sure that it's prevalent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you raised an interesting point. So when we were overseeing some of the COVID clinical trials, some sites were reluctant to accept kind of brochures, flyers, because at the time, obviously, we didn't know how it was transmitted, and people were reluctant to kind of pick up those pieces of paper. So we kind of had to think outside the box as to how else we could raise awareness. Obviously, we have digital avenues, which is great, but some patients were still traveling to a healthcare setting. So we actually kind of looked at the way that the materials were designed, and kind of developed a wipe clean poster. So the patient would walk past, could scan a QR code to find out more information about a trial, but equally from a site perspective, they could know that it was sanitized kind of each day because it could be wiped clean.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think the QR codes are, I mean, everybody's becoming more and more familiar with them, right? Like even still, I go to some restaurants and we're like, oh, we don't have a physical menu. Like it's just on the QR code. And so I think using those QR codes is great. I love the touch of it being wipe downable, because, we're all used to that kind of matte cardstock finish. It would not survive a Lysol wipe, right? So I think that that's a really nice touch to, hopefully assuage some of those worries and make it to where it is cleanable, instead of it's just like, hey, here's this thing that people are sneezing on because they're reading it while they have the flu.
Yeah.
Right. What about technology? So a question we received was, how can technology be leveraged in flu studies?
Probably I can start. Definitely, technology can be leveraged to create the content and streamline the overall content creation and translation process. And this definitely will help in ensuring the materials are developed and localized pretty quickly for the overall translation strategy, as well as for patient engagement. For example, thinking about chatbot, or being able to have interpretation, AI powered interpretation readily available for patients. So definitely technology plays a huge role in the overall content creation or localization of patient-facing materials, as well as marketing materials, digital campaigns, creation of video content, subtitling, voiceover. So anything at all that can help enhance the patient engagement strategy.
And you bring up a good point with the video. Like, if someone's waiting in the waiting room, they're going to watch whatever's on.
Mhm.
And if there's a well done ad or even a humorous ad, you think about like the poopery commercials or on YouTube. They're funny. And then there's one about some sort of tape where they tape like a car together and then they drive it off a cliff. I forget the name of the tape, but I know it's a tape product. If you can make it humorous, and with the flu, there's a lot that could be kind of humorous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take it a step further, even, Leanne, and say not even just ads, but also supportive content around consent. So like short 2-minute, 5-minute videos about like, what is a clinical trial and what are my responsibilities in this trial? Like, what might I experience? At the sponsor level, we can create a lot of that centrally, make it available to the sites. Patients can sit and watch it in the waiting room, or even send it to them at home. Hey, you made an appointment. No, you're not feeling well. This is going to speed up your experience when you get here. So I'm going to send you a few videos, give them a watch. And, we'd like to talk to you about enrolling in this study when you get here. So if ads, absolutely. I'd say even educational content as well, making it available in a video can make it to where you start that conversation before the patient even gets on site.
I've actually seen a video sent to me before an appointment that said, okay, you're going to park here. You're going to go down this aisle. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You've told me exactly where I need to go, where to park, where the door is. Because if I'm feeling crummy, I don't want to walk around a building and try to find which elevator goes to the 9th floor and then navigate all of that. But again, it's going that little extra step to relieve the burden, because how many patients are going to call the site? I can't find the door. Where do I park? So what can you proactively do to make it easier for the sites, a better experience for the patient, and ultimately a patient who feels well cared for is more likely to stay with a study?
Oh, absolutely. And my anxious heart is just like, what is the parking situation anytime I go somewhere, right? So like, go ahead and get rid of that question up front. So that's like, oh, you've got an appointment. It's coming up in an hour. This is what the parking situation is. This is the door. Love that. It's so compassionate to any of the patients that are coming in there.
Georgia, any thoughts on technology, what we could do?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of touched upon some of them, but the digital campaign piece, absolutely. But again, being mindful about how and when you increase that digital campaign. So linking that in with the flu surveillance, because there's no point having really heightened digital campaign if the cases are incredibly low and the patients have to travel hours on end to get to the other site where the cases might be higher, for example. So definitely digital campaigns. And I think that patient centricity piece is so important. At the end of the day, these patients, most of them are going to be, the majority of the time healthy. It's just they're suffering with a period of flu symptoms. So they are volunteering their time. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them to enroll and participate into a clinical trial. So, I think I love those ideas about kind of making it really clear how they can get to the site, what happens when they get there. So any ways you can leverage and utilize technology to make a patient's journey simpler, I think is brilliant.
All right, so we're almost at time. Time flies when we're having fun, right? I just want to take a minute and thank each and every one of you for participating, sharing your insights and knowledge. And for our listeners, thank you for taking time and sharing your questions with us and your attention. If you have additional questions that we didn't get to, don't worry. We will send out answers to those following the webinar. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, and stay healthy and wash your hands. And if you get the flu, there's plenty of studies out there to enroll in. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.